Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones. And we have a special 4th of July weekend show for you. We're going to be going over all the trades and the free agency and everything that's happened the couple days before that. Also July 1st, obviously, all the different moves that happened. And basically the Ducks and what they didn't do. And addressed, tons of your fan questions. Obviously, a lot of people aren't happy right now. We're going to get through all those. So if you're hanging out with your friends or family and you're barbecuing, kick back and give the podcast a listen. And we'll hopefully get all your issues and concerns addressed. So going back to the middle of this week, Eddie, actually before the free agency is when kind of the bomb went off on social media. We had 3 moves made in one day, on the 29th, right before the free agency window opened up. We had Hall getting traded for Larson. We saw Weber and Subban getting switched spots. And then we also saw Stamkos stay in Tampa Bay, all within the span of about 30 minutes, Eddie. And pretty much social media and hockey fans, just went crazy that day. But what did you think about these 3 different, 2 trades and the 1 re-signing?
It has to be the craziest 30 minutes in at least in hockey history for trades and signings. I mean, we've been waiting for Stamkos and his decision pretty much since the beginning of the year when all this started. And I mean, we've been hearing rumors about Subban and you can't see if it was confirmed or not. Obviously, it ended up being one of the bigger deals of the day. And then we've talked about Hall coming to Anaheim multiple times and them having to bring in a defenseman. And it all kind of just came to a head in 30 minutes on June 29th, and it was just insane. And it kind of all kicked off in the morning with the Taylor Hall trade. And this one was one of the craziest ones because we were expecting to be in on that. We heard what the return would likely be, what teams were looking for, what Edmonton was looking for Taylor Hall, and it ends up being just a 1-for-1 hockey deal for with New Jersey for Adam Larson. And Adam Larson, a former, top 3 pick for the New Jersey Devils, hasn't panned out offensively like they would have expected. He's a really solid defenseman, and really what the Oilers need. He's a right shot and everything, but very surprised that that's all Taylor Hall gets you. You would have expected a couple guys, maybe some picks to come back. Taylor Hall's one of the top left wings in the game, and you see it go back, and just a surprising and curious deal at the same time. I know Edmonton Oilers fans, they're happy at the same time, but I think a lot of them were disappointed that all you got back was Adam Larson. I think come this season when, they actually see how much of a difference their team plays with Adam Larson compared to with Taylor Hall, I think they'll kind of forget that it was a 1-for-1. But definitely surprising in a crazy way to kick off the day. And then obviously, like you said, it continues, and we get another hockey deal, arguably an even bigger one, where you get the 2 highest paid defensemen in the NHL swapped for each other. And no surprise really for Subban being traded, but I think the big surprise was Nashville trading Shea Weber. No point in any time of the year did we ever think Shea Weber would be on the move. I think a lot of people thought he would be in Nashville for the rest of his career, but if you're in Nashville's position and you have a chance to make a trade like this, you can acquire a defenseman who's a lot younger, a team like Montreal who's looking to move him out, and obviously they're not looking to move out their captain, but when you have this opportunity presented to yourself, I think they had to jump on it. And now, their defense was already scary to begin with. Now they've got Subban paired with Roman Josi, and I think they got even better over this June, and it's just insane to see a deal like this go down, especially with the one that came before it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think, the first trade too, like you talked about, the Edmonton fans kind of going, what? We could have got more players. A lot of Ducks fans are upset too, because we'd been looking at that left wing, bringing one in that Murray wanted to do. And you see Hall go 1-for-1. So a lot of people are like, well, hey, you could have traded Anaheim, straight up for Fowler or maybe another player or whatnot. But I don't know if they would have done that. I mean, obviously being in the same division is maybe why they made that move, because they went not only outside the division, they went outside the conference. So maybe that's part of the reason why Edmonton did what they did. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm just thinking that might have been the reason why they didn't go with Anaheim on that end. And then, like you said, the Weber and the Subban deal, I had heard some rumblings. I know other people had too, but one of my contacts in Montreal had told me that Subban and Pacioretty basically were not getting along at all, and that it wasn't just them two. There was other players as well. So there's a lot of that locker room type stuff that's going on, which is part of the reason for him not coming back, obviously, and then the move. Like you said, though, it was surprising to see Weber get sent. The other thing that was surprising, though, too, about all this was Stamkos staying because, everybody was hyping up the Stamkos sweepstakes and, there's 10 teams in on them. And no, there's 12 teams, there's 14 teams. And we saw all these reports. And I thought it was interesting, but you kind of had a little bit of a theory on this, Eddie. And what was your take with Stamkos staying in Tampa Bay?
I think it was just funny that, I mean, all year, usually we would expect a player like this to sign ahead of time. We've seen, I mean, the Lightning sign Hedman before he hits free agency. You've seen teams, they like to get these signings done before. And the fact that he didn't, I think we all accepted the fact that he was going to go somewhere, either it be Toronto or Buffalo or Detroit or Boston or Rangers or any of the other teams in on it. I mean, we never really counted Tampa Bay out, but the fact that it took so long to get him to sign, and then he kind of trolls the other teams in a way and signs with Tampa Bay a day before free agency or 2 days before free agency opens, and he just decides to go back to Tampa. Takes $8.5 million, which I think I would, with the tax situation in Florida, it might work out to be the same, but on the salary wise, he took a little bit of a hit. You were expecting him to get around what Kane and Taves making in $10 million, but he decides to stay in Tampa, and it just kind of surprises everybody. It's a weird situation to be in, especially with all the trades going on. Then you have this where, a superstar in the league, you never see them hit free agency, and then he ends up just going back to the team that didn't sign him all year. So it's just kind of an interesting situation to be in.
Yeah, and it all came, in a 30-minute span on that day. So everybody, basically that whole day, I think it took all of us, several hours to wrap our heads around everything that was going on, because as each one came out, you were like, okay, what's next? What's going to happen? We had these three different transactions occur, and then the rest of the day mellowed out. There was nothing, and then the day before the free agency, again, there was nothing. And then obviously we went into the free agency, and Friday, morning, 9 o'clock Pacific time, 12 o'clock Eastern, obviously it went, crazy. I mean, you and I were trying to keep up along with the other people on our staff, trying to, see who was going where and how much. And I mean, it was like they were just coming in constantly. And a lot of big players got moved or got signed. We saw Eriksson get picked up by Vancouver. Lucic goes to Edmonton for his big deal. Ladd finds himself in the New York Islanders. Bodker ends up in San Jose, just to name some of the big ones that went out right away. And while all that's going on, the Duck fans are hanging out, and there's really nothing going on. And everybody's getting anxious, and then in the afternoon you could see the anxiety turning into frustration. And by the end of the day, Eddie, 660 million plus in contracts doled out that day, and only one team didn't do anything, and that was the Ducks. So I mean, it was an interesting day. We'll talk a little bit about more of why it happened that way for Anaheim. But what was your initial reaction to all the big name players getting signed and all the craziness that happened the first couple hours?
Well, this is the result of being able to talk to teams 5 days ahead of time, and I think this is the reason that they've put this in place is now everything happens right away. I mean, you look at they showed a stat on SportsCenter, and the years before this rule was in place, there's only maybe 10, 12 to 30 million spent on day one because teams were just starting to negotiate with the players, and now the fact that you can have deals in place, and already they all just kind of flood in right when the doors open. They've already pretty much had these deals in place for a couple of days leading up to free agency, for at least for the big names, and obviously that's the case. You see Ladd, like you said, go to the Islanders right off the bat, Eriksson to Vancouver, Lucic to Edmonton, you get Nielsen to Detroit. Okposo to Buffalo, Backus to Boston. You get these all within like the first 30 minutes of the window opening, and it's the fact that you can negotiate with any team 5 days before. I think is why you get the flood coming in right off the bat. I mean, it's great for teams and for the players, but for us trying to cover it and put out all the news, it's a little bit crazy and hectic right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at these moves, one of the fans asked us, Daniel, he asked about, is there a certain one that you think a team will regret, or certain ones? On my end, I really didn't think the Lucic thing with Edmonton was going to happen. I mean, especially after, supposedly there was the comments that he wasn't going to be, going there, but obviously he couldn't say anything because that's, you can't wait till, you have to wait till Friday. But I don't know about that. I mean, I even laughed. Somebody on Twitter put out something funny saying, this is Lucic's career playoff stats, basically alluding to he'll never make the playoffs again, which I thought that was pretty hilarious. But I don't know. That one I thought maybe the term was too long for Edmonton, but that's one that I thought was kind of weird. But any of the other ones out there, either money or term that you thought, might backfire, like Daniel's asking about?
Yeah, listen, all of them I think money wise, were pretty fair. I think that's what the going value was on these players. I just think, all the big name ones, the term was either 5 to 7, maybe even 8 years for some players, and it was just, I think the term is what killed them. And honestly, almost all the big name deals that were signed were pretty bad. Most of these guys are 30. I think the youngest was being Okposo at 28. You get Ladd, who's 30. He signs for 7 years at 5.5. I mean, there's no doubt he's on the decline. I don't think he's going to be the same player he is right now at 30 than he is at 37, and the Islanders are stuck with him. You've got Eriksson, who signed for 6 years with Vancouver, who's in a position right now who, they think they're in a rebuild, but they're not really in a rebuild because they've still got the Sedin, so they're trying to, bring things up on the fly, and this deal might come back to hurt them later down the road if they're trying to actually go full rebuild when the Sedins are done. You look at Lucic. I think this is exactly what Edmonton needs in Lucic and the player he is, and the presence he brings, and what the style of game he plays. But 7 years at $6 million for a guy who's going to be 35 when his contract runs out. You're eventually going to have to sign guys like McDavid. You obviously gave up Hall, but Puljujärvi, who they just had, you'll have to sign him too within 7 years. And I don't know. It's a good deal for them in the short term,
Right.
and they know the 3 to 4 year picture. But I think when you get into those year 5, 6, and 7, I think it's going to come back and hurt them. And then I guess looking at the last two, you've got Nielsen going to Detroit. Obviously, they're attempting here to obviously not replace Datsuk, but bring in a center who can support Henrik Zetterberg. And no, it's a good deal, 5.25. I think he deserves it the way he's played with the Islanders. I think he'll do really well in Detroit, but he's 32 and he signed a 6-year deal, so he's there till he's 38 at 5.25 million. You don't have Datsuk's contract anymore. You kind of get out of that, but we look at the signings that Detroit made. They're gonna have to move out some forwards because they've got a lot right now, and obviously we'll get in that later. And then the last one, you've got Okposo going for 7 years to the Sabres. I think the cap hit is fair considering he only made $2.85 million last year. And he scored 64 points for the Islanders. So, I mean, he had a great season. He goes to the Sabres, he's going to really help there. But again, a 7-year contract, which takes him till he's 35 in a team that is kind of in the middle of a rebuild right now. They brought in Eichel and Reinhart and Ristolainen, but they're still looking for a number one goaltender, another defenseman. Obviously, they've been in looking at Fowler, and it's just a long term when you're gonna have to sign some other guys down the road.
No, you make a good point about all this too, because a lot of the fans are, obviously upset that Murray didn't do anything as far as making any kind of moves. I mean, I know he's on the phone doing all the stuff he got to do, but as far as the results, there was nothing out there. So obviously, we had a lot of fan questions. Basically, WTF? What are the Ducks doing? Why haven't they done anything? And part of it is exactly what you talked about, Eddie. You see all these big term contracts that got doled out in the first, half hour and the couple of hours on Friday. These contracts are not the kind of contracts that Murray wants to do. And that's exactly why these, he at least stayed put the first few hours, not, getting these kind of deals, because, we talked about Lucic and Ladd, Boddicker. We talked about some of these players that are left wingers that the Ducks might want to bring in. But the problem is he's not going to want to tie up one of these guys 7 years for 4 or 5 million a year when you still got Lindholm and Raquel sitting on the side, and those deals aren't done. So that's part of the problem. Why things maybe didn't go the way some fans anticipated, with nothing getting done. At least in the early part of Friday morning and then afternoon. Because if you look at Lindholm and Raquel, and we have another question from Richard, he asks about them getting re-signed and how much they'll cost. I mean, Eddie, you look at both of these guys. I mean, they're going to take 8 or 9 million, most likely combined, and the Ducks have 14, 15 million in cap space. I mean, if the Ducks would have gotten one of these big name players, they would have had zero cap, and that would have been a huge problem.
Yeah, and really, you have to look at realistically what these guys are going to sign for, and I mean, what we've seen the last few days, we've actually seen a lot of young defensemen, sign. Specifically, one I like to compare it to is Torrey Krug signing in Boston for 4 years at 5.25. We speculated for a while now. We think Lindholm would get anywhere from 5 to 6 million. I think we'd be surprised if it's any lower, any higher than that. Probably 4, 5, 6 years. I think that's what they're working on. That will most likely, obviously we can't confirm, but that would be most likely what you would expect a guy like Lindholm at his age and the production that he's had and how how valuable he is to this team and what he would get. And then interestingly enough, we saw Hurdle get a 2-year bridge deal with the San Jose Sharks at 2 years, $3 million cap hit. That's a deal I would like to see Raquel sign. I think they're very similar in the production they've had for their team over the last few seasons, at their age and where they are in their career. And I think it'd be beneficial for the Ducks and maybe even for Raquel to sign that bridge deal right now. Only be at a 2-year contract, show us what he can prove. He's going to have an improved role next year. We obviously saw how well he did last year. I think a bridge deal around 3.5 million is what we'd expect for Raquel, and then like you said, that puts us at the $8 or $9 million range. And no, you really can't sign a Okposo, an Eriksson, a Lucic, a lad at 7 years for 5 to 6 million dollars when you have to sign those two important young players. I mean, I understand Ducks fans being angry about signing nobody because there were a couple of deals that probably could have been made. We saw Jason Chimera go to the Islanders for 2 years at 2.25. That's a guy I think at least I would have liked to see come to the Ducks. There was a lot of other deals. We saw McGinn go for 3 years at 3.3 from the Ducks. We saw Stewart only go for 2 years and he only got 1.15 per. I think a deal like that could have been done. But you got to look at least with Stewart and with Perron. They went back to teams they had already been. Stewart's been with Minnesota before. He knows a lot of the players. He's good friends with Matt Dumba. It seemed like he wanted to go back there. He might have even taken a bit of a pay cut to go back there with Minnesota signing Eric Staal as well. And then obviously with David Perron, he took a bit of a pay cut in less term to go back and play with the Blues where he started his career, and it seemed like that was really the only destination he wanted to go. Obviously Montreal was rumored, but it really did look like he wanted to go back to St. Louis. So I think you can't really blame Murray in those deals and not trying to bring those players back because it seemed like they wanted to leave, and maybe that's nothing against the Ducks. They just wanted to go and play in an environment where they're comfortable playing, and we couldn't expect him to sign any of those big names either. So.
Yeah, I mean, we know he tried to keep Perron, and that didn't work out. So it could have been, like you said, a situation where he wanted to go back to something that he was familiar with as well, just like with Stewart's case. I think the one that kind of surprised me out of that was Hudobin. He had talked about going to the KHL, and then he ends up too going back to a former team. Eddie, he goes back to Boston. So you saw that with three of the Ducks players; they all went back to former teams, which is kind of interesting. I know Hudobin's situation is a little bit different because he was getting tired of being in the AHL as opposed to the NHL. But I had wondered if maybe the Ducks had tried to talk to him and bring him up since we don't have a backup, because there were other backup goalies that went off the table too. Yesterday, you saw Chad Johnson get signed. You saw Montoya go over to Montreal. So you saw some of those too, Eddie, that were gone. So we'll talk about it in just a second. But, the field really narrowed on Friday, come later in the day. And I think that's where the fans got more upset, Eddie. And I get it. I mean, I think with the big name players like you and I talked about, financially there was no way the Ducks were going to be able to do it. But once you saw these other players leaving and going to other teams for not too expensive deals, I can see why the fans started to get even more upset at that point.
Yeah, and like you said, once you see those backup goalies going away, we obviously knew we would need to do that after signing Freddie. You see them going for pretty cheap to other teams as well, like Montoya going to Montreal was a little bit surprising. Obviously, they've got Condon and Price as well. You would think the Ducks would have been right in on him with obviously needing a backup goalie. We see him go. You see guys like Stallberg go to Carolina for cheap. You see Matthias go to Winnipeg. Stempniak go to Carolina. You see a lot of these guys go for cheap, and even Vanek to go to Detroit for only 2.6 million. A lot of guys that we would expect the Ducks at least to be in on to sign, or to sign at least one of them to fill some of the depth roles, with the Ducks right now only being down to 7 forwards, with the obviously we're assuming Raquel signs, and Thompson being out, that puts us down to only 7 right now. The looking up at bringing a lot of players, and not bringing in anybody, nobody to fill the spots of the players we left. I think that was the most frustrating thing for Ducks fans. When you get later in the day and you see, teams around you getting better, like you see the Kings sign Purcell for 1 year at 1.6. That's a player you would expect the Ducks to be in on, especially for a deal like that. You see San Jose get a lot better, signing Bodker for 4 years at 4 million. When you see these players go for so cheap to it, especially when you're sitting there and the Ducks have literally the only team who has done nothing all day, and they're one of the teams who needs to fill so many spots after losing players, it just gets frustrating, and I can sympathize with the fans for sure.
And try to explain why this happened. There's a couple things I can offer up to people listening. I mean, obviously you're not happy because the Ducks don't. We're the only team that cannot field a whole team to play right now, which is crazy when you think about that. You look at all the lineups around the league, all 29 teams. Pretty much have a roster that they can go out there and do what they got to do. We don't. We're going to talk about later some ways of addressing that, obviously with trades, and there are still some free agents out there. I know it's hard to believe, but some of the problems, I think, Eddie, is the way that the money is tied up in the team. If you look and you go on General Manager or Cap Friendly, you can look this up. But if you look at the forward situation, you have Perry, Getzlaf, and Kessler that are tied up in $25 million. And then you go to the blue line, you look at Botman, Dupree, Fowler, Stoner, and Bieksa, you have another 20 plus million, locked up. So you have, over 45 million locked up in these guys. Which is part of the problem, as we talked about, because now you're at that 15 mil on the cap, but you're also trying to sign Lindholm and Raquel. And part of the problem, and you're aware of with Lindholm, is his agent is Claude Lemieux. And if people don't realize this, Claude Lemieux is a pain in the ass. I mean, that's just the only way to put it. He's a pain in the ass on the ice. You can ask anybody that played with him or against him; they'll tell you that. And he's the same way as being an agent. And he's new and he's trying to make a name for himself. So the way you make a name for yourself is you get big contracts. And that's what he did with Anderson. He got him a big contract, 25 mil, 5 year. And, I don't fault Lemieux for that. I mean, he's new in the thing and he's trying to do what he's got to do. But, he gets a big contract. So now he's trying to get a big one with Lindholm. That's for sure. So to me, that's been a huge stumbling block, is the Ducks have some of these contracts locked down on some players, especially Stoner and Bieksa. Obviously, we've talked about those in the podcast at length several times, and we're going to talk about it more later as well. But I think that combination, as well as not getting the Lindholm deal done yet, it kind of is like a domino effect, Eddie. It's like you've got these players locked up, and you're trying to sign these other guys, and they're not done. And I mean, not that Murray has to sign Lindholm now, but it's like there's that uncertainty. You haven't figured out what you're going to do with him and Raquel yet and how much you're going to get. And it's hard to go and say, okay, I'm going to go get these guys because I'm locked up trying to get this negotiation done with Lemieux especially on Lindholm, because that's the biggest one. I'm not saying that the Ducks shouldn't have gone out and got people. I'm just trying to tell you this is part of the problem that Murray's been facing and dealing with large contracts and getting these two guys, back on the team.
Yeah, and like you said, there's no time limit to really sign these guys. You have as long as you really want. I mean, you have till December 1st to sign your RFAs. Obviously, it's not going to take that long, but we saw last year it take up until August and September to sign Silfverberg, and it could realistically take that long again for both of these guys. But I completely agree that when you're stuck trying to figure out how much you're going to pay these guys and how much salary cap you're going to commit to these two players over the next few years, it's hard to go out and say trade a guy like Fowler and bring in a winger, or go out and sign a free agent when you're not sure how much you're going to commit to these two important players players that are going to play a big part in your team for the foreseeable future. So I understand there that obviously that might be why Murray hasn't signed any free agents. The issue there is you've seen a lot of guys go for 1-year contracts and for little amounts. You would have expected to at least sign one of those guys, but it's a difficult situation to be in, and like you said, it's kind of a domino effect. You either see one of those guys get traded, and maybe some trades happen. You sign some of the free agents that are left, but it's a tough situation to be in right now for Murray and definitely for Ducks fans.
And going forward, I mean, obviously now you've seen the way that the weekend's played out. I mean, obviously we're still in the holiday weekend, and hopefully things will move along this coming week, but there are things that the Ducks can do, and there's things that they're going to have to do because we don't have enough, forwards. I mean, period. That's just the way it is. One question that was posed to us, and this is an option that maybe the Ducks will do, but Alex asks about the players that left, or not left necessarily, but weren't signed: Horkoff, Perry, Santorelli. And what are the chances of the Ducks bringing back one of those players? And, initially I would have said no. I mean, that's, Eric Stevens wrote in his article about some of these players not coming back. I heard on my end that Perry, they weren't going to bring him back either. So initially I would say no. But now that the way that these things have unfolded, I don't know. Maybe Murray reconsiders some of these guys, Eddie. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he talks to one or two of them because all the holes in the team, and he can bring these guys back for a 1 or 2 year deal on the cheap, like you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, along with those guys, there's definitely still some possibilities out there. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, like there's definitely just because we didn't offer sheet period, there's still a chance we could bring him back. Horkoff, there's a chance that he could come back too. Santorelli for sure. They're still out there. They're obviously going to be negotiating with other teams. I'm sure Murray would be in on those discussions. I believe you would believe he's talked to them before July 1st as well to see what could be done. And definitely there's a chance we could bring them back, and there's a chance that we could sign any of the free agents that are still left. There's still some big names out there that we'll talk about in a little bit. Do I think he's going to sign someone? Yeah, I think they're going to sign a free agent before, in the next couple weeks or a few days from now. I think they'll sign somebody. Obviously, we got our first signing last night, which to arrive, a lot of Ducks fans wasn't really what they were expecting, and they're getting a two-way defenseman who's going to play most of the year with San Diego, but. We should expect some deals to come in through the next few days or weeks from now. And, yeah, I definitely think he brings someone in. If that's, Perry, Horkoff, or Santorelli, I don't think I'd be surprised either.
Yeah, now if you're looking out in the free agency world in general right now, and we'll take a look because this is, what's left. You're sitting at home and you're going, guys, give us some players that can come in and help this team because – so many people went bye-bye on July 1st while we didn't do anything. And of course, like we said, everybody's been frustrated, but we'll give you some options that are out there. If you're looking at wingers that are out there in free agency, some of the ones that you can look at are Versteeg, Verbata, Hoodler, and then even Matt Cullen as well. Pittsburgh's well over their cap. They're not going to be able to keep Cullen around unless they did some restructuring, so he's out there too. Obviously, he's more of a fourth line option. But in terms of looking at forward depth, those are some options there, Eddie. That you can't sniff at some of these guys. I mean, some of these guys did okay last year. I mean, Verbata had 13 goals, Versteeg had 15, Hoodler had 16. These are some guys that the Ducks could bring in. Hoodler shoots left, Cullen shoots left. You could, obviously Hoodler can play a decent role. You could put Cullen in that bottom six role. And these are some players that I would suggest. What do you think about these guys or maybe some other people?
I think they're good options. I'm not a huge fan of Verbata. I think he's regressed a lot. Obviously, he's played in a bad situation in Vancouver, but he's 35. He was minus 30 last year with the Vancouver Canucks. He only put up 27 points in 63 games. So, I think he's definitely an option. He'll obviously won't get as much as he made last year at $5 million. I think he'll be somewhere around 2 to 3 if he does get signed. He's an option for the Ducks. I don't think he's the best option. Like you said, there's Versteeg out there who had 38 points last year, splitting time between Carolina and LA. He's an option for the Ducks as well. Both him and Verbata shoot right, which isn't a bad thing. We did lose Perron as well, so you would expect them to bring in another right shot. Yuri Hudler is an option. He did get 46 points last year with I think he split the time between Calgary and Florida. So he made $4 million last year. He might make around the same, maybe a little bit less, around $3 million. He's a good option for the Ducks if you can get him for 2 years, around $3 million. A good playmaking left winger, can play right on the right side as well, shoots left. No, I think he's a good option. I would expect the Ducks to be in on him over the next few days. And like you said, Matt Cullen's still out there. We're gonna have to bring in a fourth line center for Thompson until, because he's out until most likely 2017. So you've still got Chris Kelly, Matt Cullen, Paul Galstad. Those guys are out there. Who Shang Horkoff, like we said before, who can come in and play fourth line center. So there's still some options out there for the Ducks. Obviously, they're not the big names that you would expect to see in the earlier part of free agency. But I mean, I don't think any of us expected them to bring in a marquee player that come July 1st.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, obviously, priority one for Murray is keeping Raquel as far as in the forward situation. So, bringing him in is number one, and then bringing in some of these other players might be options. If you look at the goalie situation, there's a handful out there too, Eddie. You've got Scrivens, Enroth, and Ramo that are still available. So those are some guys that the Ducks could, pick up and back up. I'm not a big fan of Ramo. I don't really, I mean, I know it's Calgary, but I don't think, he could do much. But I wouldn't be opposed to Enroth or Scrivens. I don't know what you think about those three guys in free agency, or maybe there's some other people out there that you would look at.
Yeah, so right now, if we don't sign anybody, we go in with Gibson and Tokarski. I mean, Tokarski has backed up in the NHL, but it's not the ideal option. And then, like you said, you gave up pretty much the only three guys who I expect to be offered free agent jobs. Maybe Anders Lindback, but I'm not too sure about that. So, Ramo shared a starting job last year in Calgary. Did okay, had a 2.63 goals against average and 909 save percentage. He was making 3.8 this year. I don't expect him to make that much. I think most teams have their starting goalie set, so you would expect him to be signed as a backup. Like, I'm not comfortable getting him. I think he is probably the best option available in free agency, which isn't the greatest thing right now. I think we expect Gibson to probably play around 60 games next year, maybe 50, depending on how he's playing and how management wants to, handle his development. But Ramo did play 37 games last year. It was the most of any of the free agents remaining right now. In comparison, Scrivens played 15 last year. He spent a lot of time in the minors. And Enroth played 16. But I think if you're out of those three guys, I think the best option would be Jonas Enroth. He did pretty good last year to 7 wins, 5 losses, 2 shootout losses, had a pretty good save percentage in .92 and a 2.17 goals against average. I believe he played in LA last year, though, and we know how some goalies can get inflated while they play in LA. We've seen Scrivens have good numbers, Bernier have good numbers in LA, and then struggle when they go elsewhere. So, it's a tough decision right now, and you could be looking at a trade as well.
Yeah, we'll go into the trade front now, basically too. As far as the goalie situation, it's really narrow, Eddie. I mean, we saw Montoya go to Montreal, so Mike Condon might be an option out there in Montreal, and we know that the Ducks have talked to Montreal, at least last week they had. So, I mean, that's really all I can offer up on the trade front on the goalies there. I mean, I think it's kind of slim pickings, but I think you're right. I would go with Enroth if you're going to, go with one of the three we talked about, and Scrivens would be maybe the second option.
Yeah, I really think those are the only two suitable options for the Ducks right now. And then obviously Tokarski would be the easy out if they don't want to sign anybody. I think you let a lot of good backups go. Gustafsson went to Edmonton. You let Al Montoya go. You let Chad Johnson go to Calgary, which would have been a good free agent signing for the Ducks. It's disappointing to see guys that we hope to come in to be good backups to a young goalie to go out the way. And now you've got a young goalie in Tokarski as an option, a younger goalie in Condon, and a fairly young goalie in Enroth. I was hoping to get an experienced guy like maybe Chad Johnson or even Al Montoya to come in and play behind Gibson and help him out. But your options are limited now, and I think they're gonna have to make a signing in the next few days for a backup goalie before they're all gone.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's really what you've got. You've got Condon for a trade and probably one of those other three, and that's really it. If you look at the forward situation in terms of trades, we do know that Detroit is interested in Fowler. That's been in the news before. And basically, we've talked about this too, a lot amongst our staff too. If you look at teams out there, Detroit has the opposite problem of the Ducks. They have tons of forwards and they need help on the blue line. Ducks are the opposite. They have plenty on the blue line, need forwards. So a trade there might be beneficial for both teams. And we talked about Tatar and Nyquist as being options. Obviously, we kind of favor Tatar because his scoring ability and his contract is less than Nyquist. You know, his is around I think 2.7 when I last checked, and Nyquist is 4.7. So that might be some options there, Eddie. Detroit, we haven't heard anything since last week, but if the Ducks want to, send out someone on the blue line, which is what they're probably going to have to do now to get some forward depth back. I would look at Detroit.
Yeah, and you look at Detroit now signing Nielsen and signing Ott and Vanek. They've added to that forward group, and now according to Cap Friendly, they've got 16 forwards under contract who played in the NHL last year, and then they've got two guys I believe in Mantha and the newly signed Laredo, who they signed from the AHL, who had a great season last year, who could be ready to play in the NHL. So they've got about 18 forwards right there, which is 6 too many. So. Bringing in Fowler for them would make sense. They've got Mike Green, Cronwall, Smith, and they still have to sign Danny DeKeyser as their top four. And I think Fowler could definitely be a big advantage to them. It would help them a lot. And it just seems right now to be the trade partner who makes the most sense. Like you said, Thomas Tatar and Gustav Nyquist are the two most likely guys to be moved by them. They would have to sign Tatar next year. And I think that's why, honestly, I think he is the best fit for the Ducks because he's more of a shooter, while Nyquist is more of a playmaker. But I think with Tatar having to be re-signed next year, and he'd be looking for around the same thing that Applicator and Nyquist make right now anyway. I think there's a chance that if they decide to bring in a guy like Cam Fowler, he's the most likely option for them to move out. And really, they, if it's the Ducks or another team, they're gonna have to make a move. They have too many forwards already right now that are NHL ready, so they're gonna have to make a move. None of those guys are gonna want to go down and play in the minors. So they look like the most likely trade partner. Obviously Toronto is still a very good fit with JVR and Fowler. We already talked about we're not too sure that Toronto and Anaheim will want to get back into another big trade. Obviously, with the Freddie Anderson trade happening earlier this year, earlier this month, that you would expect them to make another big trade. But the option is still there just because they've both got 2 years left. The cap's very similar. Their ages are very similar, and it fills needs for both teams. But I still think right now you would expect it to happen between Toronto or Detroit.
Yeah, those have seemed to be, maybe the best two right now. Another one that came up last week, which you and I both don't really think would happen, is Colorado has been mentioned. First, it was mentioned that they had talked about Lindholm, which that was shot down, obviously, by Murray. Then it came back and heard that Fowler was also mentioned. I mean, obviously, he's been mentioned with probably every team in the league. The poor guy gets called, in Hawaii, by Pierre LeBrun to talk about all this, and he's trying to have vacation, which, it's the one thing lost in all this. I feel bad for Fowler because, I don't blame him not being on social media and not wanting to look at stuff because of all this going on, as his name has come up so many times. But if we're going to look at Colorado, and some people mention that, I just don't really see anything there happening, Eddie. I mean, some people mentioned Duchesne, some mentioned Landeskog. I don't know. I mean, it just, that one seems kind of least likely to me, just because based upon their positions in the team and their contracts, I don't see it. I don't really see the Ducks, at least not trading those types of players, from getting them from Colorado.
Yeah, and we did, we heard a rumor a couple days ago. There was a couple people who, are well respected for insider, with trading and hockey on Twitter, say that Colorado's working on something big, and then I think that took on a mind of its own, and a lot of people had started to assume that was Landeskog and Duchesne, and then a lot of Ducks fans, taking that upon themselves to think that Fowler could be going back for the Landeskog and Duchesne, and obviously that's fair. I mean, what we would expect if they were going to make a trade, that would be what would happen, but To be honest, I just don't see Colorado trading their captain, let alone trading Matt Duchene. And there is merit behind Matt Duchene. He has been mentioned in trade rumors, to teams like Ottawa and some other teams, even to us during the regular season around the trade deadline. But I just don't see it happening. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It does fill a need for both teams, but I just don't see them moving out a player of that caliber right now in the offseason. I think they'll decide to wait. They've brought in Tootin from Columbus after he was bought out. They've brought in a couple defensemen. I think right now I think they're going to run with the defensemen they have. So realistically, well, I mean, there aren't too many options right now. I don't think Edmonton is an option anymore after them trading for Howell for Adam Larson. I think they're going to go in with the forward group they have. If they do make a move for another defenseman, it's probably trading Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, which is obviously not a fit for Anaheim right now with him being another center. So you really just have to look at, like we mentioned before, Detroit as being really the number one option right now. Toronto with just JVR, and then maybe possibly the Buffalo Sabres just because they showed a lot of interest in Cam Fowler. But slowly your trade options are shrinking. So
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's a lot of them out there. I mean, I think those ones that we mentioned are really the teams to keep your eye on. Like we said, Toronto, Detroit, especially. Like you said, maybe Edmonton, maybe Buffalo, and maybe Colorado. Those are kind of the ones that, are out there right now. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's another team out there, and there's something else that another team wants to unload to get a defenseman. But that's kind of what we've heard in the last week or so right now. And as far as on the Ducks end, I mean, if you look at the blue line, obviously they're going to keep Vatanen because they just got his deal done. And I would say out of the rest, it's probably, everybody's talking about Fowler, but Dupree would probably be another one that the Ducks may try to move. We've heard that before. So I think it would come down to Dupree or Fowler. I really don't know if the Ducks can move Stoner or Bieksa with those contracts. I just don't know if people would want to pay both of them, what they're getting now. Plus Bieksa has to waive his no movement clause. So that, that wouldn't happen either, most likely. But that is another fan question that someone did ask about with the Ducks, blue line depth. Obviously, we think it's going to change. But one question that some people were worried about, and this actually came up too recently, Julie Stewart-Binks brought it up about waiving BX's, no movement clause. And I think that's something we may see, Eddie. You brought this up, and Thomas brought this up on the podcast last week. We may see it, maybe not now, but later on when the expansion draft comes, because even if the Ducks do say move Fowler or Dupree, you still got to protect Lindholm, Vatanen on there, and whoever else you keep. I mean, so it's going to be a tricky situation because with VX's clause, he automatically goes under there. So it could cause some problems, because you also have Manson on the team that you're sure the Ducks would want to keep as well. So that's something to keep an eye on. I don't know if it'll happen right now, but that's something that we may see, as the season progresses, throughout next year.
yeah, and honestly, I think going into the season, I think Bieksa is despite popular opinion, I still think he's a valuable piece for the Ducks. I like the idea of having three right shot defensemen and running with Vatanen and Bieksa and Manson down the right side. I think it is extremely valuable for the Ducks, but there's definitely the possibility that Bieksa could waive his no move clause or no trade clause come time for the expansion draft. I don't think at the trade deadline, but definitely for the expansion draft so that the Ducks don't have to protect him. And honestly, I could really see him doing it. I could see him there being a potential for him doing that. I think if he does get picked up, it's not a big deal for the Ducks. I think a lot of people expect Brandon Montour to be ready, not for this season, but for the 2017-2018 season. So if Bieksa is the player that Vegas picks up from Anaheim, I don't think it's a huge deal for them. And I think, come the time, he would be willing to waive his no trade clause for that. I think it's definitely a realistic possibility. And I'm not surprised to hear it kind of come up already.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's something that'll be on the horizon too. If he's not, somehow, waiving it now for a trade or something like that, it may come down the line. But you mentioned too bringing up some players, and that's really what the Ducks. I really think they're going to have to do all of these things, Eddie. I think they're going to have to go out and get some free agents. They're going to have to make one or two trades, and they're going to have to bring some players up. And we've got a lot of fan questions about that too. We had Matt and Adam. They asked about Nick Ritchie, obviously, Cordelius as well. And I do think that those guys are going to see some more time. You mentioned Montour too, even though the blue line stack, NHL's a long season, and things happen. Hopefully nobody gets hurt, obviously. But if something happens, maybe we see Montour's come up in there. I think obviously Theodore is going to be up there more. But the Ducks do have these players to bring and fill in, and we may see more of them this coming season, Eddie. But I do think the Ducks hopefully get a backup goalie and a couple forwards out there in trade free agency, and then possibly bring up some of these guys to at least play part of the season.
Yeah, and realistically, like you said, one of all these things is going to happen. We expect to see, so either Nason or Scarbosa or Corey Tropp or Rich or Cadillac. We'd expect to see them, either start the season with the Ducks, or depending on how many holes they have to fill, or come up from the goals during the regular season. I think a lot of us would think that Ritchie would start the season with the Ducks based on the holes they need to fill now. Maybe Corey Tropp, and he can fill a bottom pairing position with say Chris Wagner as well. And then you'd see a lot of these guys come up. Montour probably fills a similar role to what Shea Theodore did last year, that comes up during injuries, plays a couple games, maybe not as many games as Theodore played this year, depending on how ready he is and how well he plays in the NHL. But we definitely think Theodore is a guy that will crack the opening day roster, depending on if a Dupre or Fowler trade is made. And then, like you said, some free agents, which would still probably be signed. There's some names out there, not saying that they'll go out and sign a Hoodler or Verbata, but, they could go out and sign a couple depth forwards. Like we said, Peary's still an option. He could come back. Santorelli, Horkoff, any of the other smaller names like Matt Cullen. I still think the Ducks make one or two free agent signings, and then you still have to. And I honestly think it has to happen. It just makes too much sense for it not to happen in a trade involving either Fowler, most likely Fowler, maybe Dupre to the Detroit Red Wings. I think it just, right now, the situation both teams are in, the Ducks having to move a defenseman, Detroit most likely having to move a forward with, they've only got one who's waiver exempt, in Anthony Mantha, and well, two, but they're not going to send down Dylan Larkin. So, there has to be. It just makes too much sense for both teams there not to be a trade, and then you've kind of got all three things going on there. We will see some guys come up, we'll see the Ducks sign some players, and we might see a Fowler trade to Detroit for one or two forwards from them.
Yeah, everything is in flux. That's basically what it is, and I know people are, obviously not happy with the way that Friday went down for the Ducks, because we thought hopefully, maybe we'd get a backup goalie, or, at least one forward on the cheap, basically. I mean, and we didn't get anything, which I feel for everybody out there. I was just as surprised as you guys. I knew that we weren't going to do much, basically because of the financial situation that the Ducks are in. Also being a budget team, you all know that. I don't have to say that again, but just so that's out there, that's part of the issue. And then Lindholm and Raquel, obviously, and trying to get those deals done. So I knew with all that going on, and obviously some of the other rumblings we heard about certain players not coming back, I knew that there was going to be players leaving the team, a lot of them not coming back, and then none of the big name type stuff going on with Ducks, on Friday. So that didn't surprise me. But it did surprise me as the day went on later, Eddie, and that's when a lot of you out there, I was cracking up. People were sending me messages left and right. Either people were texting me or sending me social media messages, and some of the stuff I can't even repeat. But I mean, you guys were pretty hilarious as far as showing your frustration to me, and I sympathize with all of you, because I'm right there with you. I really did think, Eddie, that the Ducks would have got somebody, towards the end of the day, at least one guy. I mean, I really thought so. I knew they weren't going to get someone big, but it was kind of surprising. And I think the way that they're going to have to go is all the stuff that you and I already talked about. And I think it's going to be a combination of things. I just hope it happens sooner than later, so a lot of us can, not be so frustrated.
Yeah, and really, I mean, we knew they wouldn't sign one of the big names. We knew it would be a big surprise if it happened. We expected a lot of them to get a lot of money. I don't think I expected all of them to get around 5 to 6, 7 years. But when you see that, you don't really think that, Murray might have inquired about them, but was probably scared away right away when he heard the term that they were expecting. But it is disappointing, like you said, not to get anybody to help out in that forward depth, especially when you see guys like Perron and Stewart and McGinn and them all leave and go to different teams, and then not to bring in one player, not even like I said, I know I've mentioned a million times, but like a Chimera or a Purcell or somebody like that on a cheap 1 or 2 year deal just to fill some holes. I mean, it's disappointing to see. Obviously nothing other than Nate Ginnon has happened yet, and I honestly think that's just to really replace Shea Theodore in the goals lineup, because we expect him to be up with the Ducks this year. Not similar players, but just to replace his absent with the goals. But we'll hopefully in the next week or so we'll see maybe a trade, a couple signings, something hopefully will happen in the next few days.
I know, because I mean, otherwise the podcast next week is going to be pretty dry. But yeah, that's what I look for. The Ducks, they haven't done much, but I mean, they have to do something. So things are going to happen. It's just a question of when and who's going to be with, and hopefully we gave you guys some hope as to some options that are out there for the Ducks as you enjoy your 4th of July weekend with your friends and family. We do have one more question before we go, Eddie, and this one's kind of a funny one. We had Bonnie ask us, if you were a hockey player, what position would you play and why? So I want to toss that to you, and what position would you play and why?
At this point, I think I'd play left wing just so the Ducks could sign me up, and we'd have a forward signing, so we could actually have something to go with. But I honestly, I'm from Canada, and it's probably a weird thing to say, but I never played a lot of hockey. I didn't get a lot of chance to play ice hockey, but like I said, I'd probably play forward. I think I'm more of a selfish person. I like to score more goals than anything. But really, I would play left wing right now just so the Ducks could have somebody to sign and we'd have something to talk about.
For me, it's kind of along the same lines. I would play goalie, so I could just be the backup to Gibson. I'm almost 6'5", 220, 230, somewhere in there, so I can do a great job of blocking the net. I'm not that great at skating, so that's the other reason why I would play goalie. Hey, I would take a cheap deal. I could sit on the bench and hang out for 50, 60 games the next season, but that's where I would go. Seriously, if I was to make it big, that's what I would have done. But obviously it didn't pan out, and I ended up doing some other things. But that was a funny question, so I figured I'd throw that out there at the end. And one other thing too, just so everybody knows, it's July 3rd, so it's Teemu Selanne's birthday. So happy birthday to him. He's over in Finland right now. He's coming back in August when I last talked to him. So he'll be over there for a while, but that's the only other little news to throw out there. Be patient. I know it's hard. Try not to stay frustrated. Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back in a week and hopefully have some news to report, some good news. And we'll see you then. Let's go Ducks.